Welcome to Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Excel, but Were Afraid to Ask. This is Lesson 6, How to Nest Functions. Here's what you'll need for this lesson. Microsoft Excel 2016 or newer, or Excel 365. This lesson's example files. Speakers or headphones. If you can't hear me, you're not learning everything I'm teaching. And ideally at least 2 monitors. Now you can get away with only 1 monitor, but with this lesson in particular, you will find yourself pausing more frequently to try out the different concepts we cover. Here's what you'll learn in this video. How to nest Excel functions. That's it. That's the entire agenda for this lesson. Just a quick heads up about this lesson. It was originally filmed as part of the previous lesson. Nesting functions was going to go along with text and date functions. When I was editing it, I realized I didn't want to send you guys a 90-minute video. And so I split it into 2 separate lessons. But if anything I say in the rest of this video sounds a little weird, like, oh, that thing we learned today, just ignore it. That's what's going on. So over the past few lessons, we've learned a lot of functions that I've described as building blocks. Things that aren't particularly useful on their own, perhaps, but I promised you that eventually they would come in handy. Well, now is eventually. So today we're finally going to talk about how to nest functions. In order to achieve advanced analysis or data manipulation, it's often necessary to use more than one function in tandem. This allows us to slice and dice our data in new and exciting ways that a single function can't do all on its own. Putting one function inside another function to increase and combine their functionality, that's called nesting. And that's what we're going to do today. So before we dive into some examples, a word of caution. That is all we're doing today is examples of nesting functions. And these are just that, examples. Some of these you may actually find useful in your real life or job. Some of them are just fun illustrations of ways that we can slice and dice the data, combining multiple functions in ways that we don't have a single one function to handle. So my advice on this lesson is this is one of the most important concepts that we're going to cover throughout this entire course, but it's also one of the more complex ones. So take your time. Don't be afraid to pause or go back and try again. A lot of these you're not going to get on your first try. They will take multiple attempts to get the results you'll see on screen. In all honesty, some of these took me more than a few attempts just to demonstrate. Of course, I've cleverly sliced it and cut those parts out where I made mistakes. But still, it's important to know that you're not going to get it on your first try, and that's okay. You will eventually get it, and you will be able to do this. Eventually, you'll be able to write your own functions and put them together and make everything work seamlessly and impress your coworkers and friends and bosses with all of the Excel magic that you're able to do. But today, just take it one step at a time, and when you make a mistake, don't throw your hands up and give up. Just dive right back in and give it another shot. All right? So let's go. Let's give it a try. There's basically no limit to what you can do with Excel functions once you learn to master the art of nested functions. So I've built out a few examples here on the nested functions tab. I'm going to walk you through kind of the very basic way of building them until you kind of get your mind around them. So here we have a list of email addresses. And what I ultimately want us to do is write a function, a nested function that will return just the domain part of the email address, just everything after the @ symbol. And there's three component parts to that. There's a write function because we're looking for everything to the right of the @ symbol. There's a search function because we need to find the @ symbol. And there's a len function, which we learned in a previous lesson, because the search function is only going to tell us how many characters from the beginning of the string the @ symbol is. Now, I could probably write this kind of all in one spot, write a function for it. But what we're going to do is break it down into the different pieces and then show how to put them together to help you get the idea of how something like this can be done. So again, in our search function, we just need to know where that @ symbol is. So the text we're trying to find is the @ symbol. And we're looking here. And that's it. That's the search function part of this. The length, we just need to know the length of the total string. So that's len. It's 18 characters long. And now we just need to return the right number of characters from the right. So this is right. Our text is this. And our number of characters, in this case, is 18 minus 6. Because there's the @ symbol is the 6th character. So we just need to return everything after that. And so we have that. Now these helper columns can be useful. Ultimately, the function you're going to want to write looks like this. And we're all going to pretend that we didn't see that I left out a parentheses there when I hit enter. So ultimately, this is what we want to end up with. But how do we get from here to here? Well, these are called helper columns. They allow us to take individual pieces of a function and kind of lay them out for ourselves to figure out exactly how we want to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these down because I think everyone should be pretty comfortable doing a basic search function, a basic len function, and a basic write function that references the other two. So how do we get from here to here? Well, one way is just to insert the different pieces where they're referenced. So, for example, we have this write function that is the kind of overarching function here, okay? And it's referencing the A4 cell, and then it's referencing C4. Now C4 has a function in it. So let's take this, and instead of referencing C4, we're just going to paste that function right in here. And again, there's also a function in B4, which is the other cell it's referencing. So let's take the function that's in B4 and paste that in. And suddenly, you don't need these anymore. You've got a function that tells you the domain of an email address. The more confident you get building your functions, the less likely you are to need those helper columns. You'll start to be able to understand how to write these formulas in one shot. But the more complex your formulas get, the more you might want to separate out the different pieces of them to be able to just debug and build iteratively in place. So let's take a look at another example here. So these are my grocery purchases for last year. And I want to break them down by month. Now you can see I've got, several per month, usually. So the goal is to do a basic SUMIFS function to figure out what the grocery bill per month was. In order to do that, we're going to need to figure out when each month begins and ends. So to do that, we're going to use the date function. Year, month, and then the first day of the month is always 1. And the end of month function this is our start date. Okay, so now we know the beginning and the end of each month. So now we're able to do a SUMIFS function. Our sum range is this column. Our first criteria range is this column. And we're looking for anything where the date is greater than or equal to this date here, January 1st. One of the quirks of the SUMIFS function and a couple other logical functions is that when you're doing greater than, you can just type the greater than symbol. But when you're doing greater than and equal to, you have to put it in quotes. Equals greater than or equal to, and then have an and symbol to join it with your actual condition. So this is all entries in my grocery budget that are greater than or equal to 1/1/2019. If I just enter that, that's going to give me all of my groceries here. So we also need an additional criterion, and that is, again, in the date column, less than or equal to the last day of the month. And that should give me my grocery bill by month for all of 2019. Now, obviously, if I were doing something like this, I wouldn't want to have 3 whole columns here. So what I need to do is just replace those references with replace these separate columns with the actual functions that we built out. So again, I think the easiest way to do that is to take the function we built out and just replace the pieces as we go. So we're referencing I3. So we're just going to take this and replace it with I3. And we're referencing J3. So we're going to take that reference and change it to J3. And now you can see we're referencing I3 again in the end of month function. So we're just going to take that piece again and put it there. Now we shouldn't need any of these helper columns. So as you get more comfortable doing this, you'll start to be able to figure those pieces out in line and not have to create all those helper columns. But in the meantime, there's no downside to creating those as you're starting to build out your functions. So let's take another example. Here's 2 things that we learned this week: the substitute function and the text function. And here we've got an example of a statement where we want to replace 2 different tokens, essentially. So we're actually just going to do this inline, iteratively. This is how you would do something like that. So basically, we're going to take it one step at a time. We're going to take the substitute function. We want to start with this piece of text here. And we want to find this little website thing. And replace it with the actual website. All right, that's a good start. We replaced the website. Now what? Okay, now we want to replace the phone number. We're just going to wrap the whole function in here. So this becomes our text, our input for the new function. And now our old text that we're looking for is this phone number. And our new text is the actual phone number. And we can see that we still don't quite have exactly what we want because we'd like this phone number formatted like a phone number. So for that, we use the text function that we just learned. And the part that we're going to use the text function on is just this. It's a number now, and we want to turn it into a formatted text string. So we're going to take the text function there you have it. So there we were able to do all of the work inline without having to create helper columns, but we still kind of did it in pieces. Sometimes you're able to write your functions that way. You're able to just do piece by piece and figure it out as you go. The final example we're going to take is a balance account example. So what I want to do here is I want to show the difference between the debit side and the credit side under whichever side has the larger balance. So we want the sum of this side minus the sum of this side. And over here we want the opposite. The sum of this side minus the sum of this side. That's great, but now I only want to show the one that is bigger. So how do I do that? Well, what about an if function? Equals if this is greater than this, then we show the sum of this minus the sum of this. If not, just show a blank string. And over here we do the same thing. Okay, so now I've got something that when I change these numbers is always going to show the net balance. And finally, just to complete this, essentially, you could also put a balance label here using roughly the same formula, about the same if thing, but I just want to say that. And so now I've got a nice little balance of accounts. Now let's go back and look at some of the functions we looked at earlier in the lesson and see if we can do some examples of nesting with those. Starting on the day, month, year, weekday tab. So earlier we looked at the weekday function, and that's all well and good. It's returning a number. We can figure out what day of the week that corresponds to. But now that we know a little more about nesting functions, maybe there's an easier way to do that. So we start with this weekday function, right? But now let's take that and make that an input into a VLOOKUP function. So when we write a VLOOKUP function, the first argument is the lookup value. What we're looking up here is this weekday number. So that's our first argument. And then our table array is here. We're looking at column 1, 2. And we do not want to use range lookup. Now we've got a much better visual use of the weekday function. Moving on to the end of month function. Sometimes when you're doing budgeting or you're doing any kind of analysis, you want to account for the fact that different months have different numbers of days. So one thing you can do is to figure out how many days are in a month is to use the end of month function with the day function. So we know that the end of month function will tell us the date of the last day. It'll return the serial number of the date of the last day of the month. And we know that we can figure out the day number using the day function. So when we put those together, we can figure out how many days we're in a given month. So looking at these substring examples, it can get pretty complicated because, I mean, it's easy enough for me to type in like left 6. I know how many letters are in my first name. And my last name. Problem is, of course, that when I try to apply those elsewhere, I'm going to get different results. So how do we solve that? Well, again, we're going to take a piece-by-piece approach because this one's a little bit tricky. What we need to do is find where the spaces are in between the words. So to find the first space, that one's easy. We're just going to search for a space in this string. Okay, we know the first space is right here. Now, how do we find the second space? That's trickier. But we learned something. We need to find a space within this text, and we need to start after the first space. We know where the first space is. It's here. So to start after that, we add 1. And that tells us where the second space is. Then we take the len function. So now we know the total string length. And now we can begin to take the different pieces of this. So to get the first name, we need everything to the left of the first space in this text. We know the first space here is 7, but we don't want to include the space, so we're going to subtract 1. And there's a function that will actually work and get you all of the first names. We're going to skip mid for a second. To get the last names, we need write this text. And then we know where the second space is. that's here. And we know the total length, that's here. So we just need to subtract total length minus the second space. And then the mid function. Again, the same text. The start number is right after the first space, right? We want to start, this is character 7 right here. We want to start right there. So right after the first space, so +1. And the number of characters, that's everything between the first space and the second space. Hopefully. So second space minus first space. Cool. So how would we do those just as standalone functions? Well, the left one's pretty easy. We're finding a space within this text. And -1. The last name one was a little more complicated. So how did we do that? We took this here, H3, and just pretty much keep replacing the parts of it that reference other functions. So it only looks complicated when you write it all at once like that. So to get the middle name, which, if you remember, was the hardest of the three to put together, we're going to try yet another helpful method of building nested functions. And I call this the diagram method, or the plan it out method. Basically, we're going to write out exactly what we want to do, and then we're going to try and follow that like a roadmap. So let's look at the function we wrote before. So what we did originally was we took the text, we took the first space +1, and then we took the second space minus the first space. Those were our three arguments. So we're going to remember that, and we're going to just write them out so that we remember what we have to do here. First was our text string. Second was the first space minus 1. And finally, we had the second space minus the first space. So now that we know what our three arguments are, we're going to see if we can do them all in line without copying and pasting things from other helper columns or anything like that. So let's give that a try. Equals mid. So our first argument, that's the easy one, that's our text string, which is an F3. Next, we have our start number. So we've decided, according to our roadmap here, that that's the first space minus 1. So how did we get that first space? We searched for a space inside F3. Okay, that wasn't so bad. And then minus 1. Now, we've nested the mid and the search functions here, and I think this is a good spot to just make sure we're on the right track. So what I'm going to do is, instead of entering a function for the number of characters, I'm just going to put some dummy data, some placeholder data in there, just to make sure that so far we haven't screwed this up. So I just threw a 5 in there. You can throw whatever you want. And you can see that we have screwed it up. So what did we do wrong? This is supposed to be the first space plus 1, not the first space minus 1. So let's go ahead and fix that in our roadmap, and then fix it here. And now we can see that we're starting in the right place. So now that we know we've got that part right, let's move on to our third step, which is the second space minus the first space. So we already know how to get the first space. We just did it. The second space is a little bit trickier once again. And what we did there was we searched for a space, but we started after the first space already. So there's a few pieces to this. To get the second space, we need search for a space in F3, and our start number is the first space plus 1. So another search function. That's our first space, plus 1. That gets us our second space. So from here to here is the second space now. And then we're going to subtract the first space. And that's, again, and then the final step here is we cross our fingers and hope this works. Promising. And there it is. So that is our final example of how to build a nested function. Before we go to our recap, I just want to say, again, this was a lot of material, and some of it is pretty challenging. So don't be frustrated if it took you several tries to get some of these functions to work. That middle name function took me about 15 takes to get right. Why do I teach this if it's so f***ing hard? Okay. The message here is don't get too hung up on if it took you a few tries. You'll get these concepts. The more you work on them, the better and the easier they will get. Let's recap what we learned today. We learned how to nest Excel functions. And we took a couple of different approaches to nesting functions. We went over the helper columns method. We looked at an iterative or step-by-step method. We also tried the plan it out method. And there's my personal favorite, the just keep trying stuff until it works method. Thank you for watching, and join us again for the next lesson.